Hi, Charlie. Hi, everyone. A pleasure.
It's going to be really good, but I'll just hand it over to you kind of straight away for your presentation. You might have to bear with us for a second while we unshare and reshare to get the content ready.
Can you see that? Is that coming through for you guys?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I will go relatively quickly on this just for the joy of getting through, but you'll get an insight into where I started. I grew up in a small hill farm in near Wiveliscombe in Somerset. I spent my childhood looking after animals and walking around in mud, starting to play with ropes and silliness in barns at a very young age, breaking things, learning how to tie knots. My primary school, and at my first primary school, they took me to the local theatre in Taunton, and in that small theatre, I realised, although there were the actors, there were also the lighting and the sound and the set, and I think I probably went and saw one or two productions over the years and got quite interested in the way that you could be transported to another world just by changing the scene or the story. I then went to secondary school, and we were very lucky. We had a beautiful hexagonal theatre, and I very quickly started doing lighting there. I then joined National Youth Theatre and learnt a bit about sound and lighting. I think that was when I was 16 or 17. And we worked again in theatres, and I sort of picked up skills. I then, whilst I was at school, got a bit obsessed with Excel, spreadsheets, documents, all of those weird things. Didn't ever do anything useful with them, but it was I liked the way that you could do the calculations and all of those things. So after school, I didn't go to university. I went straight to London. I moved to London aged about 18 and worked in a lighting warehouse preparing lights for all kinds of theatrical shows and rock and roll shows. And then eventually, I guess when I was about 22, having worked in the warehouse for 3 or 4 years now, I was allowed to actually go out and started to do touring around the UK. And I guess most people imagined it would be a very exciting lifestyle, lots of late nights and partying. And actually, the reality is, when you do a tour, you load lots of trucks every night, you coil cables. I learned CAD. I did more loading of trucks, I did more cables, lots of late nights, lots of early mornings. And I would tour with such famous bands as Take That and Cliff Richard, Genesis and Phil Collins, who probably most people haven't heard of, but back in the day was fun. We used to, as I got older, we would then go into, I would join European tours, and the scenario was probably wake up 6:30 in the morning, unload the trucks, put in the rigging points, lift up lighting trusses, build the stage, roll the stage in. By 11 o'clock in the morning, maybe stop and have a light breakfast, carry on, focus the lights after lunch, do sound check. The band would, support band would turn up. We would do the show. Probably the show would finish at maybe 11 o'clock at night. Then you would take it all down again, probably for 3-4 hours, load it all back into the trucks, have a quick shower, onto a touring bus, and then onto the next venue. So quite relentless, but it really taught me about how to deal with people. After about 15 years of that, which was great fun, and I saw lots of Europe, I ended up being asked to work on a show in the Millennium Dome. And the early days when I turned up, they were just starting to put up the yellow masts. This now, of course, is the O2 Arena in Greenwich. And I worked on the central show, doing CAD and sort of design with the designer Mark Fisher. And that gave me a really good insight into a slightly different part of the business, so it was a lot more design orientated and looking after packages to make the stage or the flying systems. This was for the Millennium. That show had huge amounts of technology and was really pushed what we'd done previously in the UK in terms of flying people, but at the time it was met with much criticism and was sort of widely criticised by all kinds of people as to being a waste of money, etc. So that was quite a learning experience. After that, I went to Athens for the 2004 Olympics, and I sat there with my laptop drawing what I thought they wanted. And in this case, the creative director and the creative team said, we want to launch a Cycladic sculpture. And I said, well, the only way of doing that, if you want it to be really theatrical, is we need to have a backstage space, maybe a hole in the ground. And so on my little laptop, I drew a hole, and they all laughed and said that was impossible, they would never do it. And the hole, I think from memory, was about 30 meters in diameter and then about 27 meters deep. I went back to London, having presented all my drawings, and then got a call a few weeks later saying, we've got a few questions, we've started digging down and we need to know where all the pipes are going to go. And they'd dug this huge hole in the middle of the stadium for the Athens Olympics. So that was my first, I guess, real test as quite a young person still, realizing that people were taking my drawings seriously. So that was fun. The Athens Olympics, we had a lot of fun. We had to make a lake which drained into the same hole. We did Olympic rings with gas, and I sort of looked after most of the CAD and design for things on the ground, but huge teams. I mean, obviously there's lots of other teams, but after Athens, I then effectively just concentrated on doing Olympic ceremonies and big opening ceremonies. So I went to Doha in 2006, Qatar, you'll have seen in the news with the football. We did a very big ceremony in the stadium there. And then Vancouver, we did a little bit of work on there for the Winter Olympics. And then whilst I was in Vancouver, got asked to work on London 2012 as their technical director. So I got a very privileged position, because obviously in the UK there are lots of people who could also do my role, but it was one of those relationships that I'd met somebody, the executive producer Catherine Ukwu, whilst I was working in Doha, and she introduced me to London and said, Piers, I really want to work with you as technical director. So we then worked probably for 3 or 4 years, and we, in the end, although it felt it felt like a very long time, in a relatively short amount of time delivered 4 ceremonies: the Olympic opening and closing, and then the Paralympic opening and closing. To give you a sort of rough insight into what a technical director looks after in live events, we have to do a lot with creative teams. So in that instance, the artistic director was Danny Boyle, but there will be all manner of different creative teams who you're working with. You have to look after the technical design, so CAD, engineering, planning, and then oversee, you're not doing all of this stuff, but you're overseeing the people who do the lighting, audio and intercom, so you can talk, aerial and rigging, anything where you're lifting stuff into the air, the stage, pyro, so fireworks and effects like smoke, and then special projects, things like an Olympic cauldron, for example, or taking David Beckham on a boat down the Thames. And then probably as important as the bits are the crew, making sure that the right people are in the right place and you have the right understanding and crew for doing a day shift or a night shift. And then maybe not as exciting, but it's important, keeping control of the money, because most of these big shows are spending public money, the schedule and procurement. And probably the key part of that, and you can just see me hovered in the middle there with a red hat on, is communicating. So constantly making sure that people know what's going on, because it's always changing, and in an event there's always different things happening, so you need to make sure everyone's up to date. So this was during the build of the show, and then towards the end, as more and more people come on, we ended up with, I think, about 460 staff and 1,200 contractors and 500 volunteers, and all of these people are working effectively backstage. They're all not seen on camera most of the time. You can get a little sense here. This is a model that we made of the stadium, which allows, even in the today where everything is done in infinite detail in 3D and virtual reality and CAD, we still like to have a real model. And this was Danny then using that model to kind of show what he imagined the start of the ceremony would be like. And then probably 8 months later, this is the same scene delivered in, obviously, in reality. And our scope included the flying system above and all kinds of tricks which you can't see underneath the stage. And there was something nice for me, because when Danny was asking about, you know, could we have sheep in the ceremony, I sort of went back to my childhood of living in Somerset and went, yes, I think we can have sheep. We'll need sheepdogs, and we'll need to find a team who can get them used to being in a stadium. So we, over several months, worked up a sort of plan where we could train the sheep to just get used to different noises and sounds, and every day we took them into the stadium and they got used to it, and it was, I guess, their second home. So yes, it was fun. And then obviously at the end of that, we had a few highlights, the Olympic rings being one of those images that people remember. And then the really sad thing is, of course, once you've done an opening ceremony, you need to take it all out again, because people in the sporting world still are obsessed with the running and jumping things that make up an Olympics. So most stadiums will hold sport a few days later. So we then go back to planning again, where we do a horrendous amount of planning, literally using an Excel spreadsheet. So what I'd learned as a young teenager became very useful. You break down each area and you do it basically in half-hour increments. You can see on the right, explaining what you're going to do. And then we take everything out. I don't know if this will run. I think we are running. So this is just after the opening ceremony, and we work overnight. You can see the cauldron in the middle. And this is all of the technical crew. I think we brought in maybe 12 cranes. You can see everything slowly taken out of the stadium, and then very slowly, this is the second night, we take off the track protection, and you can see the turf is exposed, and then we clean the track, and then this fantastic team come in and lay the grass. It's all watered, and then we're finished, and the next day sport starts. So that's been my career. We've, as a company, this isn't one of my it's a company project. It's my co-director Jeremy, but it's a good example of what we do a lot of now. So Ed Sheeran, we get a concept from a designer, in this case Mark Cunniff, who's lighting designer and the show designer, and then we calculate how to do the design. We do work with engineers. How would you tour such a big object? And here is the Ed Sheeran concert being tested. So we make sure all the masks work. And then this is Ed Sheeran's concert being set up. a few days before the audience arrive. I think this is up in Manchester, but it gives you an idea of, if you think the number of people involved in getting a concert going, and this Ed Sheeran concert is now, I think they've gone over to New Zealand and Australia, and then they'll go across North America. So at the moment it all looks very industrial and not very much like a show. So that was the first day. And they're slowly building the stage. And now the main steel masts are finished, and you'll see the production come in with the lighting, audio and video. They unload very, very quickly. All the loudspeakers, these are sort of the big plectrums. A big LED screen in the middle. And then as quickly as it's gone up, everything will be tidied away, ready for the audience to come in. So I'm going to guess this will be the show day, making sure all the video works. All the stewards turn up and then the audience come. And then obviously this is the finished thing. So I guess the thing that I've always enjoyed, we'll just do one more project, is the fact that we work all over the world. So we've done these national days for Abu Dhabi and Dubai, maybe for the last 5 or 6 years. We were asked to do a big show in a reservoir. So you're having to really think on your feet, because obviously water isn't the easiest way of doing a show. So we built some really big pontoons, which I think came over from Holland, and then scaffolding from Dubai, and then the piece in the middle, the caster evolve, came from Yorkshire, a great company called Stage One. To understand the space, we use 3D scanners so that we can capture the space and then model the show in 3D. So this is ahead of us doing the show. And then this was after, just before they were doing the show. This was some of the site team and the client. And then the show itself, this is the sort of the finished article where we're projecting onto the cast disc, using drones to lift fireworks, which you can see in the background. So lots of new technology at play. And then finally, when you're thinking about working in the creative industries, it is huge, and we're very lucky in the UK that we have such a sort of good history of theatre and TV and film. I've just listed out a few of the jobs, so people always go, oh well, you know, I want to be a stage manager or maybe a writer or a producer, but there are lots and lots of roles, all at the moment in very short supply. So it's a great time to get into the industry. Lots of designers required, model makers, prop makers. So yes, I'm sure you'll have lots of good questions to ask me about that coming up. Okay. Let me stop sharing. Okay, Charlie, that's it from me for that little bit.
Thank you for that presentation. Some really interesting stuff. I can't stop thinking about the sheep. I'm just imagining the person who owned those sheep getting a call being like, can we use your sheep in this giant event?
Yeah, in a show.
The insanity of that must have been so surreal.
I think always, yeah, always those shows there, you do come across people who are totally out of their normal worlds. But that's, you know, that's fun. You're doing, it's an easily understood output what you're trying to do. It's just the context is difficult because it's in front of an audience of millions of people, which always is entertaining.
Yeah, I imagine so. And just so kind of joyful, I guess. That's bring a lot of joy clearly to a lot of people. The first question kind of comes off some of the things that you were talking about. So you mentioned the phrase CAD a lot. And
Yes.
obviously I am not in events, but I thought, could you kind of develop on what that is, just in case anyone else is wondering what that was, because you mentioned it a few times.
It is computer-aided design, doing drawings. The nearest you will see to that, I guess, is if you are getting a kitchen done, somebody will draw it up. So it's the process of drawing a design and then making sure that it fits. And it has been, I guess, the bedrock of our industry, because it allows us to put very complicated structures or staging into buildings and know that they will fit. And why that's important is if you're doing a tour, you need to make sure that your tour fits in every venue, because each venue is slightly different. So we use CAD to pre-visualize, and then it's the bedrock to maybe create a rendered picture of how it's going to look, and also maybe make a video so that the client can really understand the finished output before they've spent lots of money. And so the CAD is a design tool that allows you to see a little bit into the future about what the show might look like, ahead of committing sometimes tens of millions of pounds to actually create these shows.
Okay, yeah, great. Learned something new. Thank you for that one. So I imagine, these huge events, and you said they have to travel from venue to venue, and they're going up and down and being taken apart and flown to different places, or however they might travel. I imagine there's a huge kind of safety element to these kind of projects and designs. How do you take into consider safety to stop anything from going wrong in these large scale events?
Yes, it's a huge part of what we do, and I guess it's broken down into different phases. So there are the design risks, which are in some ways easier to address. So just engineering things properly so that they can't break. So a stage is strong enough to take the people who are going to perform on it. And then you have the operational risks, things that come about because you've got to revolve a stage which rotates round. You make sure that the performers understand it. You make sure that there are e-stops, so if there is an issue, anybody can stop the movement happening. So and then there are the day-to-day risks of, as you spotted, taking down a lot of equipment and putting it up. And that's about training, making sure that everyone understands what we're doing and the safe way of doing things, making sure that there is the right equipment to do it. So we'll use a crane to lift something heavy rather than having 20 people trying to lift it physically, and making sure people have the right tools. So I guess it is a very specialist industry, and we focus a lot on training and making sure we have the right equipment. And then clearly, because it's a legal requirement, we have to do the risk assessments and method statements, which everyone's familiar with, to make sure that we've headed off any potential risks, and we can put in control measures to try and mitigate those risks. And we'll look at stuff if we think it's too dangerous. We'll redesign the way we do it. But it's dull. I mean, it's not the most exciting thing, and it's something you have to do it, because it's not sustainable if you have an issue with safety.
Yeah, and it must be just, it's such a big job. I don't know who does that job, but I definitely don't think I could.
Well, it's interesting. In the early days, it was always you'd have a health and safety manager, and we still do. But actually, each and every one of us who work have that obligation to look at safety. So anybody on a production, rightly, if they spot something which is unsafe or could be done in a better way, they're encouraged to come forward. And that often some of the best changes to productions have come from crew who've gone, hang on a minute, could we do it this way? Or if we had a little bracket here, we could lift it like this, and that would make it safer. And that's encouraged. I mean, that's what should happen.
Right, exciting. It's good to know that you've got a team of people that you rely on.
Yes, yeah. They're always very big teams, and that's part of the joy, is working in different parts of the world and trying to identify who's going to be good and who's going to help.
So just because I'm wondering from that one, how many countries have you done events in? Like, is there a lot of traveling, or is that something that happens in the kind of certain roles and not others and things like that?
Ooh. Yes, I've been very lucky that I've done an awful lot of travel. So I've seen large parts of the world. It is changing, and I think that's a good thing. I think, as you know, and you mentioned flying equipment, the aspects of sustainability and moving equipment and people to do these events is not sustainable in the way we have been doing it. So it definitely is changing, and we're working really hard to build, you know, for instance, we do a lot of work in the Middle East, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and we're working very hard to educate and build supply networks in those countries, so we then don't need to bring people from the UK or Australia or America to do it. So yeah, I have done lots of travel. We do a lot less because obviously we can now do a lot of calls online. You know, we can use Zoom or Teams and educate people, and obviously emailing drawings, but there is still, you know, the shows are still being taken around the world to be seen by people. So depending on your role, there is still a lot of travel for some people.
I think that's a really good point as well, like thinking about this, because events will never be the most sustainable industry. I feel like within its nature, it can't be. But it's great to hear that there are people that are thinking of sustainability and trying to kind of reduce kind of carbon footprints and things like that. Is that kind of becoming an industry standard then, that people are really thinking about the kind of sustainability impact of events?
Weirdly, the biggest impact isn't necessarily the show. So we can do a lot in terms of reducing the volume of equipment that is being moved, and just because of the technology with, you know, lighting using more LED, the amount of electricity we're using is less. But the biggest cause of, I guess, energy use is our audience traveling to the show by far. So if you do, you know, Ed Sheeran does 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium, it's the 80,000 people traveling, and that's about you know, it's something that all of us, society, has to work at and go, okay, if we want to do these big events, how can we make the energy used less, and that's something we all need to work at. And you know, there are lots of things we're doing in the background for the shows, but really, you know, one of the things we all have to work on is take a train to go and see an event, don't drive. It's all of those things, because 80,000 people is a lot of people. That's a lot of journeys being made.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe some of our students watching can kind of think about how they can kind of travel to any event they're at a little bit more sustainably in the future. So yeah, our final question for kind of the formal interview part before we move on to our student Q&A. So please do keep any of those questions submitted, and thank you for any that have been submitted so far. Is to kind of think about kind of roads in to the industry. We get a lot of questions that are around kind of, you know, do I need a degree, or are there any kind of apprenticeships available? So it'd be great if you could answer that a little bit.
When I was a lad, I did there wasn't much formal training available. So if you wanted to work in lighting or audio, for the most part, you either worked in your local theatre, got experience as a volunteer, you didn't get paid, and then you worked for a supplier, maybe somebody who rented lighting and audio, and you learned effectively on the road by doing. These days there are lots more options. Do you need a degree? It is really helpful, yes. Is it a prerequisite to work in the industry? No, but there are lots of educational facilities around which have formalised that training and will be really good. So, you know, in London or Liverpool, there's LIPA, there's production park up in Wakefield, clustered in the southeast. There's Mount View and Central School, and rather there are lots of places that do that, Rose Bruford. But my biggest advice would be get involved at a local theatre and see whether you actually enjoy it. Because one of the things I would hate is for someone to do a formal education and then actually get exposed to the reality, which can be very late nights and away from home, and you quickly go, oh no, this isn't what I wanted to do. So I think you have to do a mix. You have to do, and potential employers will see that you have to get real world experience, and that will very quickly steer you in the right direction. Because for me, I really just wanted to do lighting when I was 18 or 19, because that's what I understood. But actually in my career, I've moved, I've done audio, lighting, bits of rigging, and then moved into being more production management and CAD. And actually I've enjoyed every aspect of it, but it does change. So getting real hands-on experience, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and I like that as well, of getting the hands-on experience and then trying it, and you've changed throughout your career, so you might not always stay in the same role. So be open to learning about all other aspects as you go through, because you don't know where you might end.
And it definitely makes you a stronger person, just having insight into lots of different areas of events, and lots of people will start out in one area and then 10 years later go, actually, I'm really not enjoying this anymore, but I could do this, and that works really well, just being able to sort of slightly change direction.
Okay, so we've had a couple of questions that have been submitted, both live and pre. So we're going to start off with a question that's come in from Mark, and he says, thank you for the presentation. And his question is, what is the most enjoyable part of the whole process for you?
Oh, nowadays, watching the teams and supporting the teams and seeing a very complicated, stressful event come together and being able to go, no, we're going to do this. It's going to be okay. And then watching people who didn't believe they could do it actually deliver something magical, and seeing their enjoyment. I love, I love the joy of seeing an audience enjoy something you've helped deliver is great. But I think for me, it's watching a team come together who perhaps didn't know each other and deliver something really magical and go, yeah, we can do anything. And it just giving them that confidence is a really great part of my job that I didn't expect to enjoy.
Like that. It's always good to make other people feel good, right? That's human nature, I think.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's good.
So Oakwood High have asked, what skills are important to go into this industry? Oh,
people. Everyone thinks it's very technical and you need to know about lighting and audio, and they study, the resolution of projectors and all of that. I don't think it's really important that you know some stuff, but the biggest thing I think you need to do is know about people and how to communicate, and that ability to communicate and listen well and understand what your creative teams are trying to deliver, and trying to navigate through that then allows you to do the technical side, if that's the area you've gone into. But yeah, communication and working with people. When it's 3 o'clock in the morning and it's raining and you're in a country where no one speaks English and everyone is tired and a little bit angry, you need a character which can deal with that and still not make light of it, but still enjoy it. So I think working with people under difficult circumstances, for me, has been important.
Definitely surprised me when you said people. I was not expecting that one to be the answer to the question, so definitely good to know. So we've had another question come in, which is, how much has your job or field changed as technology has developed, and how do you anticipate that this will change in the future?
Oh, good question. Okay, one thing never changes, which I stick to, which is, if you go as a group of people to see an event. It is this joy of a shared experience. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. The Romans were doing it in the Colosseum, albeit looking at lions. We do it now when we go and see a concert, or we go to a film, or we go to the theatre. It is a shared experience. That joy of looking at your friend and going, wow, are you enjoying this as much as I am? I think it won't go away. And then the thing that obviously has changed is the speed of design and development. So with the use of video content, augmented reality, so we're overlaying things for a TV audience into the live space, virtual reality, where we're able to offer a lot more detail into shows, or so there's lots of very speedy technology which is coming into the show, but you still can't beat a really good performer on a stage performing, whatever that, whether that be circus or a singer or some kind of aerial act. I guess the speed of change is driven by computers, and maybe we're on the verge of something new now with AI and how that will affect live performance. We can certainly do a lot more with people's mobile phones and how we can deliver information to you on your phone, which we wouldn't have dreamt was possible a few years ago. But that's all noise in the background of making a really good experience for people.
Right, so we have just time for one or two more questions. So our next question comes from Mark again, and he says, environmental issues aside, what are the biggest trends going forward? For example, are people asking for more unique venues or bespoke events, etc., things like that?
Oh, difficult question. Okay, so moving forward, this is my vision of the future. Shows are going to be shorter. I don't think you can expect an audience to sit down and watch something for 2.5 hours in the way that we used to. So I think that's a trend that is coming. So you will have a variety of entertainment, but I think a show will be an hour, say, or and we have some resorts we work in where people will literally ask for a half-hour show, whatever that might be. So I think that there's a marked difference in length of show. Bespoke venues, we've worked on, and we continue to work on different venues, but an instance of that would be the ABBA Arena in East London, the Void show, which was a bespoke venue. And the great thing about that is you're in control of your energy use. It is completely tailored for one show, the ABBA show, and it gives the audience a very high level of care and quality, I guess, which you wouldn't get elsewhere. So yeah, bespoke venues definitely is not going away, and I think that sustainability question is really important for venue design. So yeah, I think venues will be designed not for multiple shows, but for one show, one type of show.
Yeah, definitely. I can almost see that trend happening more and more frequently with like the secret cinemas, that they kind of decorate the whole cinema and then just do it for that one event. One was recently in Manchester and it's touring around. So yeah, definitely seeing more of that, I think. So interesting, great to kind of hear that, and especially from someone who's in the industry. So our last question before we look towards ending the session comes from Falmouth School, and they have asked, what advice would you give to students who are starting their GCSEs soon and are thinking about trying to get subjects and work experience and may potentially want to go into this field?
I think carry on doing your GCSEs for sure. You're going to need all of the basic skills that you're being taught at GCSE level. You're really going to need, and I didn't realise how important my written English or maths or physics or literature was until a few years later, where I was going through a script or I was writing a procurement document or a schedule, going, oh wow, now it finally makes sense why I was taught all this stuff. At the time it didn't make any sense. So continue doing GCSEs, reach out. So if you can, this is really old-fashioned. I know it's not going to be popular with some people, but actually use the telephone and use your legs to go and see people. And you will find, if you make the effort to reach out to theatres or companies or suppliers to say, I'm 16 and I'd really like to just come and spend an afternoon to see what you do. It's amazing how companies respond to that, because do you know what? There's a real skills shortage in our industry. And so rather cynically, the companies will welcome you and will go, yes, come down and we'll show you what we do, because they're hoping in another few years you'll come back and potentially be an employee. So I guess the biggest advice is reach out, don't be scared. When you start out in the industry, you're not going to know lots of contacts, you're not going to know exactly what's going to how or what you want to do. You may just know that you want to be involved, and people know that, but go and make contact with people, email them, but ideally phone them, and if you can, go and see them, because that's really good. It's a great, and people will very happily sit there and have a cup of tea and a biscuit, even if it's only for half an hour. But you start to build up your contacts list and to try and understand in what you're doing, how it works. So I think, yes, but you still need your GCSEs. You cannot run away and join a circus unless you actually know how to write correctly.
I love that. That's very quotable there, but as we head towards the end session. So do you have any final kind of thoughts or comments that you'd like to say to our students before we end today's session?
Yeah, work in the creative industries. It's by far the best, most exciting industry to work in. It's really does change people's lives. The output is really good. You're bringing joy to people and you're educating people. And don't imagine that it's dull for a minute. I've worked all over the world, from Tokyo and Pyeongchang and the Middle East and Brazil, putting on events, and they're really big. And most people focus on the star, the Beyoncés or the Ed Sheeran, which is great. But this, for each one or two really successful performers you see, there are thousands of people working backstage to deliver that.